Hey folks, Astro Diver number 1 here. Today I'm doing a water pump impeller change on a 2011 Yamaha F70 four-stroke LA. Alright, so what you're going to need is you're going to need the water pump impeller. This is the Yamaha part number. You can buy a whole water pump impeller kit, which I have done previously, and I just kind of use that as parts. There's a part number on that. And one thing, the last time I did this water pump, I inadvertently over tightened the water pump housing bolts. They're a 12 millimeter bolt, and I stress cracked the plastic. So if the water pump hasn't been changed in a while, you might want to get a new water pump impeller housing. It does not come in the kit. You're also going to need a 14 millimeter wrench, a 12 millimeter socket, possibly pliers, a flathead screwdriver, some grease, and a marker for the trim tab. So our first step is just to make sure that the engine is in neutral. Our second step is going to be to tilt the engine all the way up. Make it a little easier to get the stuff. Then I'm going to mark the position of the trim tab. This one is slightly off, probably 7-8 degrees, so I want to make sure it goes back into that position. And then use your screwdriver to pop this plastic tab out, and that will access the first 12 millimeter bolt. And get that tab off. Now once that trim tab's off, there's another 12 millimeter bolt hidden up in here. You need to pull that off. These are both 12 millimeter bolts, but the one that goes into the trim tab is considerably thicker than the one that came out hidden in the bottom, and this does have a washer. So now on to the 14 millimeters. So there are 4 14 millimeter bolts, and what I do is I loosen the 4 until I have just a few threads showing. That's mostly unloosened. There's probably a few threads still in there. Then what I do is I just give it a few whacks to separate the foot from the midsection. There we go. So now that the foot's loose, I'll go ahead and take out 3 of the bolts, leave 1 threaded in, just in case it slides out on me. So I'm going to support the foot and just remove this last bolt. And just jostle her off. Okay, you see this down here? That's the speedo tube. That's what you might need your pliers for to get this off. I'm going to try to wiggle it, but I'm going to need pliers. Last time it just came off, but that's what I'm going to need the pliers for, is to pull this tube. There we go. And carefully remove it, and then we're going to put it on our stand. So as you can see here, I made a little stand out of this workbench. It just makes it a lot easier to work on. Set it up on a couple of pieces of wood. So the reason why I got the water pump housing, it's made out of plastic. And last time I did it, You can probably see that little line there. That's a stress crack. I over tightened this nut. Bad job on my part, but it wasn't split entirely, and I said, well, I'll just keep an eye on it, and next time I change out the impeller, I'll get a new housing, which I did. So, but if your boat has not been serviced for a while, you may want to get a new housing for the impeller. This engine has 400 hours on it, and this will be the third water pump change. So we've got our 412 millimeters here. And yeah, making up a little stand like this really makes life easier. I hate doing stuff on the ground. I'm going to put some grease on these next time. They're not coming out as smoothly as they were last time. Alright, so you should have two long ones. And these have little square index washers. And then two shorter ones. I'm going to grease these next time. I failed to do that. It did not come out very easily. So we're just going to jostle this housing, pull up, and up off the shaft. And we can see our impeller here. And yeah, this impeller probably has 180 hours on it, I'm guessing. You can see it's folded in pretty good. It was still pumping, but it was getting weak. You may need to use a flat blade screwdriver just to get the impeller started up the shaft. It doesn't harm to put a little bit of grease on there now to help it slide off. Another thing you want to note is the direction that the impeller blades are curved. That's going to be the direction that it's going to have, the housing is going to have to be twisted back on. Yeah, and put a little grease on that before the shaft here, before you pull the impeller. It'll make it a lot easier to come off. There we go. And off the top. And I always set it down, same orientation that came off. Alright. There's a small key here that has to come out. It doesn't have to come out if you're just replacing the impeller, but in my situation I'm going to replace this thrust plate here. It's getting a lot of wear on it, and unfortunately I bent it a little bit with a screwdriver trying to pry the impeller out. So we're just going to give it a little love tap here and hopefully not lose it. And now we can remove that thrust plate and gasket. I may have to reuse the gasket. I used it in the last change, but I do have a new thrust plate. Yeah, I had to sand this plate down here. There's a lot of adhesive and gunk on it. Again, there's 400 hours on this engine. If you're just replacing the impeller blade, which I did the first two times, you don't have to go through all this. Just wanted to point out, you can see that thrust bearing is pretty well grooved. Also notice that there's little cups here, and they point down. So just make sure that when you put this back on that these are going down. I don't think you could put it down upside down anyhow. Let's see. No, you can't put it on upside down, so don't worry about that. So the shaft's nice and tight here. It's rotating just fine. So I don't think any of that needs to be replaced. Not yet. So we're going to put this gasket on. Like so. And we're going to take our plate, our new plate. I believe it's called a thrust plate. I'm not sure the exact name of the part, but that's what we're going to call it. There we go. So the new Yamaha water housing doesn't come with anything. It's just a bare housing because, hey, why would you need any of the stuff that goes in it? But fortunately, my water pump replacement kit has this grommet, which I need to replace. You can see it's torn up in there. So the installation kit that I had before, I just used the impeller out of the installation kit before, and it has a new cup to put in on the inside here. So we're all set. Alright, so I'm going to put this new grommet, rubber grommet in. I believe it goes in that way. Just push it in. We'll add a little bit of grease to that later. And then there's a plastic retainer. It's got these two little tabs on it. You can see these holes right here. Those are just going to go down and pop into those holes. There. Like new. Again, you don't have to go through all this if you're just replacing the impeller, but here's the cup, and that's pretty self-explanatory. That's just going to go in right there. It should lock down flush with the housing. And again, after 400 hours, I'm finally replacing this. I've just been reusing it for the last 2 impellers, but you can see the scoring there on the contact area. So new one does not have that. So not a bad idea with this many hours to replace all this. So I don't have a new housing gasket, but this is the one that came off when I did the water pump at 100 hours, and it's in great shape, so we're going to reuse that. Now for the impeller. I actually have the original impeller that only has 90-100 hours on, and I could probably get another 90 or 100 hours out of it, but that would be stupid. So putting a new one on, you can tell which way is the top and the bottom. There's a notch here for the key that goes all the way out, and you can see the notch, whereas on the other side the notch is closed off, so it wouldn't be able to slide over the key. So this is going to be the bottom. We're going to slide this down and make sure that this goes, we're going to reinstall our key and make sure this goes over the key. The key is going to have to be tapped in. Just make sure that you're very careful doing this. You don't want to score it. Make sure it's parallel with the shaft and that it's bottomed out. Looks good. So another thing I use the marker for is I just mark the impeller blade that the notch is at, so it just makes it easier to line it up with the key. Right on over it. Alright. So we're just going to put a little bit of grease inside the cup here, just to help lubricate the tips until the water gets there. And we're going to slide it on down. Until it sits on top of the impeller. Alright, for this part, I'm going to rotate, as you're looking down on the shaft, you're going to rotate it clockwise. So as I'm rotating it clockwise, I'm going to put pressure on this housing with the impeller, and those arms should fold into there. It's important to turn the shaft clockwise though. Piece of cake. We're all in. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the, since the other ones are pretty corroded, I'm going to go ahead and use those new Yamaha bolts. So So yeah, I just put a little bit of grease on these bolts. Again, they had some corrosion on them. I failed to do that last time. I'll learn my lesson this time. And this time I'm going to be very careful tightening them with the 12mm. I don't want to stress crack that housing again. Although the other one lasted probably 170-80 hours, so not the end of the world. So just very carefully on these here. Go around. Cross over. Whatever your favorite technique is. Well, they all feel equal to me. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of grease here to the top of these splines just to help them go in easier. A little bit of grease here on this wear surface. A little bit of grease on these splines and that O-ring. Alright, we're all set to go back in. Alright, this is always a super fun part. Sometimes it goes right in, sometimes you're screwing around with it for, 20 minutes. Now remember, you got that speedo tube, that little rubber tube. Make sure that lines up, gets back on. Pretty easy so far. Something I forgot to mention is there's a dowel pin right here. Put a little bit of grease on that because they tend to corrode a lot. And this pin here on the port side. Remember, in the front you've got that rubber tube that needs to go on, and there's like a little zip tie type of lock that holds it on. That's the most difficult part of the job to me, is getting that tube back on. So just don't forget that. Make sure it's on before you get it all buttoned up. So before I actually finish tightening the 4 on the sides, I like to put this bolt in just to make sure everything's nice and squared up, and I'll tighten that down along with the other 4. So I'm not sure the torque specs on this, but this is a pretty long 14mm wrench. But I like to tighten these down completely before I go ahead and tighten down that 12mm for its final tighten. So get the sides tightened down first, and then go ahead and get that 12. Alright, so that's tight. I don't tighten that 12mm with the ratchet as tight as I do the 14s on the side with a wrench. So our last piece is just the trim with our mark. We got our mark there. We're going to pop that on and pop the plastic piece on, and we'll fire it up. Make sure it's working. Now, it's been about 3 months since I fired this up. We just don't have time to use it, but it might take it a second to start. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, water stream's stronger than it was on the other impeller, so.
Alright guys, I hope that helped out. Sorry it's going to be kind of a long video. I had to replace some extra parts. I know there's other videos describing how to do this on the tube, but I needed to change my impeller and I needed to make a video. So have a good one, folks. Take care. And by the way, this takes normally about an hour just to change the impeller out. It took me over 3 hours, but because I was doing the whole video thing. So we'll talk to you later.